We're going to start at 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Have you ever been in a combat situation?
Define combat, sir.
Shot?
An incursion underwater to retake an impregnable fortress held by an elite team of U.S. Marines in possession of 81 hostages and 15 guided rockets armed with VX poisoned gas.
In that case, no, sir. Excuse me.
Okay, let's go.
Hello and welcome. Welcome and hello. This is Wait, You Haven't Seen? It's a show where we talk about movies, and specifically, we talk about a movie at least one of us has never seen before. I'm your host, Travis, a.k.a. TV's Travis. This is episode number 231, and it is the final week of Cage-A-Palooza 2023. And here, to join me for this, because he had never seen the movie The Rock before, it's Alex Albisu. Alex.
Hello. Hi. I'm back here talking to you on the internet about another movie that I haven't seen, which is many of them. But in this case, it is not Dwayne Johnson. This is a different movie. I was very confused. I watched about 10 films featuring Dwayne Johnson. I text Travis. I'm like, this is way too many. I don't know how I'm going to watch The Rock. And he was like, no. It's this movie. I was, oh, Nick Cage. That makes sense. Okay, so here we are. And I watched it last night. We're going to talk about that.
Okay.
For having me.
So first question, with 1996's The Rock, how is it that you just never saw it? Like, what did it? I mean, okay. First question would have been, you probably weren't old enough to see it in theaters. It is an R-rated movie. 1996.
That is true.
You wouldn't have been old enough to see it, I'm pretty sure, because you're a few years younger than me. But you just never like accidentally backed into it. You didn't have a friend who had like the DVD. This was an early DVD, and actually, it's on the Criterion Collection now. Yeah.
Oh, that's a big deal.
Yeah. It's an early Michael Bay film, which we'll talk about. But was it just one that like you never came up, or what?
No, it's a movie. Travis, I'm a very busy man. Okay, I'm a very busy man. I'm a very picky man when it comes to my movies. I just so happened to see let me think, the Trolls movie in theaters. Back it seems I prioritized that over this masterpiece of a Michael Bay film. It's a movie that just frankly I'd never gotten around to seeing. I really like Nick Cage movies. I think his delivery in this, he doesn't go full on Nick Cage or anything, but it's very fun. And I was definitely in looking back at the 90s and everything kind of flowing up to this point of Nick Cage, Michael Bay, and everything that kind of flowed from that. And I was like, this is such a movie that I should have seen so long ago and would have loved, and I just never got around to it. And I was bummed that I never got to see it up until now. But hey, you know what? Better late than never. Yeah. I'm happy I saw it. So thanks for making me watch it.
Absolutely. This was one that I actually didn't see it in the theater. For some reason in 1996, I probably went and saw Independence Day 3 times and skipped this one for some dumb reason. Or either that or 96, I wouldn't have had a driver's license yet, so I would have had to get rides. And most of my friends didn't quite yet. We were like right at the cusp of that. So there's a lot of like our parents not wanting to take us to an R-rated film would happen sometimes. But this was one I saw not long after the theatrical run, and then this really kicked off like a moment for Nick Cage where he was in action films. Like, so he was coming off of Leaving Las Vegas, where he won his Oscar. So 1995, he wins an Oscar for that. He does this movie, and I think partially because some people were saying like he couldn't really do action movies because it wasn't really his style. Like he's too quirky for that. And so I feel like because you have to think about what his career had been like leading up to this. He had done movies like Trapped in Paradise,
exactly.
Guarding Tess.
That's weird to think about though. Gosh, he's had over his career so many good action flicks, and the point of his greatness in action flicks is in fact the quirkiness.
Oh yeah.
That, you know, like, one of the things that, like, immediately when you said that was like Kick-Ass. I remember seeing
Yeah.
that movie, his portrayal, and like that was great.
Mhm.
He and also just the way he voices Spider, what is it, Spider Noir in Into the Spider-Verse, or like
Yep.
whatever.
Yeah.
That was great delivery. Very Nick Cage. Awesome for action and, you know, whatever. It was very good. It's funny to hear that now.
Yeah. And like, so he does Leaving Las Vegas. He immediately, his next few movies are The Rock, Con Air, Face Off, City of Angels, and Snake Eyes. So like 4 of the 5 of those are action movies. He's leading them. He did that in the span of 3 years. He made those movies.
Imagine.
It's crazy because you look at some, like, there's times where he's got a bunch of movies, but they're like lower budget, and sometimes it's a cameo role or a small role in it. These are movies like, this movie was not quick to shoot. A movie with effects budget like this, followed up by another Jerry Bruckheimer produced action film in Con Air, followed by a John Woo movie. Like, these are all movies that take a long time to do, and the guy just likes to work. And
yeah,
you know, this was him just really kind of showing, like, you know what? Yes, I can do action movies, and here you go. And he's made a career out of, like, you could look at just his career of action movies, and there's so much to them, let alone any comedies or dramas that he does. And
by the way, at that early in his career, imagine getting the news that, yeah, you're gonna star next to Sean Connery. It's like freaking James Bond, and he played the Marine general on the island. Ed Harris. Like, that's who you're acting opposite, you know. Ed Harris towards the end, but that's got to be a little bit of I don't know. Do you get stage fright if you're Nick Cage at that age? You know,
it's hard to say. There was one of the trivia bits I read, so take it with a grain of salt, was that Connery signed up because he heard that Cage was doing this movie. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. I do know that Sean Connery did help executive produce the film, because there was a story of Michael Bay. Now, this was Michael Bay's second feature film. Okay, he had been a music video director. He was of that same kind of era and class of David Fincher, and those guys, Tony Scott, Russell Mulcahy, where they were doing music videos, and then they transitioned into films. And so Michael Bay's first film was Bad Boys. And the next year he makes this.
Really?
So,
that was his first movie?
That was his first movie.
I never realized that.
Yeah. It's, I mean, he hit the ground running. Like, he hit the ground. Yeah. You know, he works with Jerry Bruckheimer, Don Simpson, and as producers, and he immediately gets big budget action thing. But he does this. This, for me, is one of my 2 favorite Michael Bay films. This one and The Island with Ewan McGregor and Scarlett Johansson. If you haven't seen The Island, I highly recommend it. It is a great action movie.
I have seen it. Yeah.
And the thing with The Rock, for me, is it is every 90s cheeseball action movie. Right. You know, it is your Con Airs, your Armageddons. It's all of that Michael Bay, Tony Scott action movie of the 90s, all distilled into one movie. But what makes this one kind of rise above some of those and be a little bit more memorable is that cast. Because a lot of those movies would have 1 or 2 people in them, or you might get a few as you go along. This one hits that upper echelon of Sean Connery, Nicolas Cage, like you mentioned, Ed Harris. You've got David Morse is the second in command to Ed Harris. And he's an actor that I love to see and stuff. You got Candyman in there, Tony Todd showing up, who basically does nothing until an hour and 45 minutes in, and then he gets to be one of the big bad guys at the end.
He was great. I loved his little bit.
Yeah.
The actor who plays Dr. Cox in Scrubs.
John C.
What was his
McGinley.
name? Yes. So when he showed, dude, I can spot that man's jaw from a mile away. He's got like a very specific lip structure, and the way he talks and the way his teeth show through his conversation in silhouette. You can
Yeah.
see. I remember that very first scene. I had one of those Leonardo DiCaprio moments, you know, the meme where he's like,
Yep, you're pointing
and
at
I
the
was
screen. Yeah.
I was like, oh, Dr. Cox. I was like, wait, was it? And I was about to text you, but I'm like, no, hold on. I'm taking notes for this. No, I can't do that. And he kept showing up. I was like, oh yeah, Dr. Cox, look how young he was. And you're right. They had all these different people that kept coming up, and you're like, oh my gosh, look at all these people. It was nuts.
Yeah, and like he is one that when I had seen him in like this and in Seven and a couple of other movies, and there was this period of time in the 90s where he was just showing up as like a supporting actor in action movies, playing like a tough-nosed like SWAT guy or Marine or something.
Yeah.
And so then when Scrubs came out and I see him as Dr. Cox, I'm like, oh, this dude is funny. Like he is just laugh out loud hilarious. And I never would have guessed it. If you'd only shown me him in like Seven and this movie, I would have never. But he's great in there. You've got the FBI director Womack as John Spencer, who is an actor that I loved whenever he would show up and stuff.
Yeah, that was so. When did he die?
Oh, it was just a couple years ago, I think. I want to say, but it was probably longer ago than I'm thinking, because that's just how that goes.
Yeah, his well, are you talking about the FBI director, the guy who he was in The West Wing?
Yes.
Yeah, he died
2005.
a while
So
back,
yeah,
I'm pretty sure.
18
Because
years
I was
ago.
trying to think of like, okay, did this come out or like just before he died? I couldn't remember, but it was nice to see him in this movie because he's a brilliant actor. Love him in The West Wing. But he definitely is typecast. I was like, oh, it's the freaking chief of staff. Oh no, actually, he's playing FBI director in a big office in DC. Okay,
Yeah,
so I
exactly.
just thought that was kind of funny that a lot of these guys are typecast. Ed Harris, same thing, right? Like
Ed Harris,
Sean Connery, similar sort of deal.
Ed Harris is so good in this, and
He is very good.
what I love about it is like there was some of the trivia, some of the stuff that I've read about this movie over the years is that he questioned a little bit kind of motivations for the character, and he wasn't sure about his performance. He wasn't sure about the character. But I look back at this, and part of what makes this movie work so well is performances like his, because they don't dive into the character all that much, right? Like we get backstory, we hear about who he was in his career, but we don't spend a lot of time with him other than like him giving orders.
Right.
But the performance tells you so much about who this character is, who this General Hummel is. And I think that's the type of thing that when you cast somebody like Ed Harris, you get that. It's all the performance he can do without saying a word that gives that
The whole
character
bluff
depth.
at the end. Yeah,
Oh,
the
yeah.
whole bluff at the end where he was like, "No, of course we can't do that," because you don't ever really want to put, I don't know, like servicemen and women in who are fighting for something very specific, and in this case, a very valiant thing that they're trying to, make a point about.
Mhm.
Want to see them use weapons of mass destruction in a certain way, which was very timely for the time, by the way. Weapons of mass destruction in the 90s leading up to 9/11 and all that. I thought that was an interesting kind of just going back to the times of like, what was the 90s like? Oh yeah, you have Bosnia and Desert Storm and all that. And knowing my father-in-law, who Marine Corps colonel, veteran of all those wars, like I was watching it and seeing kind of the point of, no, we're doing this like for everybody that wasn't getting what was theirs and the sacrifices and everything, and that no, we can't, at the end of the day we're not going to do it. I thought it was it felt like a very hello Bella, I heard that. It felt like a very kind of like nice way to still like show that they were like honoring like these people and like acknowledging that was like a really, really hard time to be in the military back then, and for a variety of reasons. So it was a very interesting it was very interesting, kind of almost go back in time to seeing what life was like for servicemen and women back then.
Yeah, and it gives depth to his character because he has honorable intentions, but he's been pushed to the point of doing something, or at least threatening to do something utterly horrific in order to get his point across. And it's sort of in a way you could almost look at this like if you looked at it through the lens of something like John Wick, where John Wick had gotten out of whatever that life was that he was in, and then losing his wife and subsequently losing the dog is what pushed him to do crazy stuff because of her. Hummel is like that. Like he had this in him, but as long as his wife was around, she kept him in check. And so that opening scene for him to be at her grave and just be like, look, you know that I've tried everything. You're not here now. I got to do this. And like, it's that, and then the bluff at the end that he's not a dishonorable man. He just was pushed to a point where, and then on top of that, he gets himself in bed with, and then he gets himself in bed with some mercenaries who they haven't reached those higher levels ranking in the military. And so they're a little more susceptible to like just going for the money. And that's all they care about. And he made the mistake of hiring them because desperate times, you don't really have a choice. He'd put himself in that position, and then you bring in those guys and all hell breaks loose. And
pretty crazy.
It is. And then you mirror that with what the FBI and the military are doing, which is they don't have any choice. They've got to go after and use this guy that has been in prison for 30 years without trial that no one knows about. And that's where you bring in Connery as John Mason, basically James Bond. Like he's pretty much, in fact, someone had done the math, and like, I remember when this movie came out, my friends and I making that comment, like, so he's basically just James Bond, right? And then not hearing anything about it for like 15 years. And in the last 10 years or so, I've heard a bunch of people saying like, oh yeah, The Rock is just another James Bond movie. Like, yeah, I know. That's not new. We've been saying that for 2 decades. Yeah. Like it.
And by the way, I like the headcanon that I built that it is actually a James Bond movie. And in fact, what we saw was not Mason, it was Bond doing all those things. I like to believe that. I don't know about you folks at home. I personally choose it. But, you know, the other thing that really caught me with this movie when he came in when we were introduced to Mason and we see Nick Cage enter the room and that initial interaction, instant chemistry. They had instant chemistry. And I thought that was so well done, the way that they introduced the two and immediately created a this obvious sense of disparity in like their experience. Immediate. And I thought that was very well done. Not in a way that like threw Nick Cage under the bus in a very overt manner. It was all just so well done. I thought that was very well written and very well shot. And the whole bit with the quarter and watching him bash that in and trying to break in through that mirror. I thought that whole scene was some of my favorite in that movie. I really liked that.
Yeah, all the early stuff with Sean Connery, what's great about it is, like, first of all, with the long hair and the scraggly beard, he just looks like a badass. Like, he looks like that guy that has just old man strength, right? Like, he doesn't look physically imposing, but if he hits you, it's like being hit by concrete. And on top of that, so he's got that, and his demeanor, pretty much from the time he's introduced until he finishes the haircut on the balcony, his demeanor is very like gruff and angry, and it's almost like getting the haircut kind of lightened him up a little bit, and we see a little more of the heroic side of the
we see James
character
Bond all of a sudden. You know, it was Bond. This is what I'm saying.
And I just love that because like it's such a good character going through the movie, and you're right, they have that disparity of experience between the two of them. But what's cool about it is Cage's character of Stanley Goodspeed is really good at what he does. So when they get to the point where they're disarming those rockets, like Mason, you know, he's holding that string of pearls, all the VX gas like things, and he goes to move it, and Goodspeed is not afraid to like slap at him and just be like, do not move that. And he immediately stops because he realizes this guy knows what he's talking about. There was a great kind of camaraderie between the two of them that you can only really get from throwing two people into a situation like that. And you're forced kind of to figure that out.
Yeah. it was a genuine highlight for me of the movie, watching the two of them perform together. And I wasn't really sure what to expect when I heard when not when I heard, but like when I remembered like who all was in this movie and like what that you had to really think about this dynamic of, oh, you've got a young Nick Cage. By the way, he looks 12 in this movie with like with a widow's peak. It's really weird. He looks like such a baby. He looks so different back in the 90s. Like you forget about, because you see him now versus what he looked like back then. Very different. Um but yeah, a 12-year-old with a widow's peak. Anyway.
Yeah, his hairline was receding from like the start of his career. So
oh brother, I mean, tell me about it. I'm just dealing with it too. But his but I didn't expect that Sean Connery and him would have it was so natural. It was just like really good throughout the entire thing. And also seeing the juxtaposition of Nick Cage starting, his character Goodspeed. Yeah, Goodspeed starting a family, having a fiance, and kind of seeing this future, of like, hey, this is a man who has a daughter, and that's all he has left. And there's some that seeing that little moment of, okay, there's some relatability between the two of us as well. I thought that whole experience was great in the movie.
yeah, yep. And you see, like, I think too, some of that naturalness comes from they did a lot of work rewriting and touching up the script and ad-libbing some stuff on set too. Like Nick Cage is kind of famous for doing that anyway. He does a lot of ad-libs, and he does a lot of sort of, well, this is what my character would do. And I think that Connery punched up some of his dialogue, and it worked. It made things sound better between the two of them and their dialogue with other people. It didn't sound like they were reading lines. It sounded natural in that way. And Cage made the decision to have his character not swear, which is really funny in an R-rated movie, because like, again, it's such a weird thing to think about. Like, Nicolas Cage would drop F-bombs in all sorts of movies prior to this and after it, but for whatever reason he felt like, but this character of Stanley Goodspeed was one who didn't do that. So it was a lot of gosh, gee whiz, friggin', while everyone else around him is dropping F-bombs left and right.
That's the funny thing about how I watched it, Travis. I watched it on Hulu Live TV or whatever. So it was edited to be able to be played on FX. So there was a whole lot of frickin', and they used the S word, but it was a lot of like dubbing. One of my favorite parts where I noticed that happened was the trolley bit, where the dude's hey, welcome to the trolley. By the way, he was holding a little thing, and I'm sitting there taking notes, and I catch a glimpse of it, and I'm like laughing. I'm like, why is he holding a sausage? I don't know what else was going through my head. I saw him holding the lever. I was like, why does he have a sausage in his hand? Oh no, he's the trolley driver. Anyway, I was watching that whole bit, and then at the end where he's just irate, and you see him lipping the whole word, but he's saying something completely different.
Oh, that's funny. Because this is definitely one, like, this earned its R rating, not just for the gun violence and everything, but it's and so for the character of Stanley Goodspeed to be like the only one until the very end, he doesn't drop a single F-bomb. He finally does when he takes out the final Captain Fry, the dude with the big chin and the underbite that he puts the capsule in and punches him in the face.
How brutal was that? By the way, speaking of R-rated and some of this, like the level of gore and just brutality, the gratuitous violence, awesome, really good. Like very typical 90s Michael Bay. It felt very Michael Bay.
Yeah,
that moment was great.
Yeah, that's part of, I think, what made like 90s Michael Bay movies. It was Bad Boys, it was the 90s action movies weren't afraid to be R-rated. They didn't all have to be PG-13. And I feel like late 90s into the early 2000s, there was a seismic shift where the studios were afraid to do R-rated. And so they moved everything to PG-13. What we would get is the occasional R, but it took until, another 10 years later, 15 years later, where like R-rated became more mainstream. And I don't think every movie needs that. I don't think every movie needs a gratuitous, even every action movie. But it's nice to see that in there because it's a different type of storytelling. Something like this or Con Air, I feel like needs to be R-rated, whereas Gone in 60 Seconds or a lot of superhero fare can go PG-13 and be just fine. But like, obviously, there's some stuff that just works better when you can go that route, when you can go to those places. And something like The Rock, because of the nature of like the story that they're trying to tell, which is this is a general who's at the end of his rope and he's doing whatever he can and he's getting brutal mercenary soldiers, to go that route, I think just works better. So
the practical effects and that being a means to what probably like what a lot of those 90s action movies were, with the practical effects, practical explosions, prosthetic makeups, and how they show certain gory scenes, like the guy getting the thing pushed in his mouth, chomping down on it and dealing with all that. The other thing that really stood out to me was the boils at the very beginning, like when the dude gets trapped in the room, and watching all that just naturally kind of pussing up from the skin. Like you could tell they probably had some kind of a prosthetic that started to just kind of pump air or something into these like little sockets. Me as somebody who understands practical effects sees that, but back in the 90s, like that was groundbreaking. And still is in a lot of ways. It holds up. Here we are. Gosh, how many? Almost 30 years later. It's very impressive.
Yeah. If your CG can't look photorealistic and help extend practical effects, it's going to age poorly. And that was what we saw in a lot of mid to late 90s stuff that relied too heavily on CG, and a lot of the mid-2000s stuff that would rely too heavily on it. What we saw, obviously there's been the renaissance of like practical effects and then using computers to extend and amplify those things. And it works so much better, but you still have to have a good base. That's why, it's why movies like The Thing can last so long. In 1982, it's over 40 years old, and it still looks great because Rob Bottin did so much practical work on that. And there's something to be said for a thing that's physically in the space when you photograph it, even if you then augment that later. That's where the newer trilogy of Star Wars films really did a great job with that, because they took a lot of those practical effects and just added to them instead of doing everything in the computer. And
well, you see that with the what is it called, the volume, and you hear all the actors that are in the volume talking about what it's like working in those conditions, and they say it is truly like what you said. It's truly a difference when you can see, even if it's a slightly distorted kind of image on the back screen of the wall that you're facing, but what it creates is natural lighting. It creates a much more immersive experience, and then you actually feel like you're in the world, so you can kind of add that to whatever you're experiencing or trying to portray as an actor in that moment. I think that is such a cool thing that happened, throughout, 20, 30 years, especially. Like you saw that starting in the 70s and especially through the 90s, and then to your point, like in the 2000s and stuff, it kind of dropped off. But I love the fact that it's back. I love it.
I do too, because look, computers can do a lot of great stuff, and I've seen some amazing effects work, and VFX artists should be paid a hell of a lot more than they are, given more time to do what they do. That's part of it too. When you have too quick a turnaround times, if you rush anything, it's going to be done poorly. But there's something to be said for, where are you going to put the time and effort in? Are you going to put it in on set with something like rigging up squibs, like they had to do in this movie, and so you see the actual like particulate and blood coming out? Or is that something you're going to do later on? There's too many times I've seen really poorly done like CG blood for an action movie, and it's like, well, you can tell they just didn't want to do that on the set because it was going to take too long. And
Take a bottle of ketchup, go
yeah, exactly
all over. Yeah.
Whereas like this, Michael Bay is one too that he is very much about visuals. Whether it's Transformers stuff, even stuff like Transformers, he was still doing so much practical. I remember seeing the behind the scenes from the first Transformers film where there's that shot in the movie where one of the Decepticons is going down the highway and it like splits that truck in half. And they actually had a truck rigged up to blow up in half. And then they CG'd the Decepticon in the middle of that. So he was still doing practical effects then. And that's why like the first Transformers film still looks amazing 15 years later. Because of all that work that he did there. And here, I mean, one thing about Michael Bay, people like to rag on him a lot, and I get it. He's not really a bad director. He's done some... He tends to... Like the Transformers movies, my problem with them was that it felt like the same movie every time. And it didn't feel like he was moving there wasn't a good story going on. And so it just was like, okay, I've seen this 4 times now. I don't need to see it again. But visually, he's always so good at knowing where to place the camera, how much coverage to get to give something compelling to your eye. And then on top of that, action that you can follow. Like, there's that car chase in The Rock through the streets of San Francisco. But you're never, you always know where all the cars are in relation to each other. And there's never any points where you're like, wow, that just feels weirdly out of place. Like, why did he hit that? No, this is, Mason's driving that Hummer and he's going to plow through anything in his path to like create chaos so he can get away, which is great.
So you might know this because this is kind of your deal and you know all these things. What was that? I take it that they did some of those scenes in San Francisco. Like, there's no way you recreate streets that, do the dips and everything. Like, and also they do anything in Alcatraz, like actually shoot in Alcatraz, because that looked like Alcatraz.
Yeah,
they did.
So this movie had a budget of about $75 million, which is a big budget, especially in 1996.
That's a lot. Yeah.
Because I think I want to say Waterworld was one of the most expensive films ever made, and it was like $100 million, and it was only a year or so earlier. So this was a big budget movie, but Bay insisted they shoot on Alcatraz, and the producers and like the studio didn't want to. They're like, let's shoot it in LA. We can do some establishing shots, a couple of things, and then we'll fake it back in LA. And he's basically said like, no, this island's too badass not to shoot on. So they shot the movie on Alcatraz, and it was still open to the public at the time while they were shooting. So there would be tourists like watching them make the movie on Alcatraz. But they also did shoot in San Francisco, and that was a problem at one point because, as Michael Bay put it, to get the permits to shut down like a couple of blocks of the street was like thousands of signatures, and it was a pain. And if they went over time, people were complaining about it, and it was expensive. But in the end, it's worth it because I believe that it's San Francisco instead of being like, oh no, that's clearly Vancouver, right? Or wherever.
Yeah. Very distinct. I've spent a lot of time in San Francisco for work events and some other things. And I mean, going up and down the streets, like, you don't recreate that. Like, you if you've been there, you know that. And seeing Alcatraz in person and seeing that in the movie, I was like, I'm pretty sure that this is the place. Like, they actually shot there. So that's cool that they were able to do that.
It's like if you have a movie set in New York City and you shoot it in Toronto, or you shoot it in Vancouver, or you shoot it in Chicago. Yeah. If you know the city, and you can tell. Like, I was having this conversation a few weeks ago because when I covered a movie called The Fisher King with Robin Williams and Jeff Bridges, the movie is set in New York City, and my guest that week, Adam Mock, lives in New York City. And he was saying, like, one of the things he appreciated about that movie so much was they shot it in New York, and he could tell. It just felt like New York the whole time, instead of watching a New York movie that's clearly shot in Toronto.
Right.
And especially when you have a city as unique as San Francisco, or, one of those, like, shoot it there. It just looks so much better.
Iconic. Yeah, for sure.
What was it? There was because Michael Bay, obviously his second film, so he's still a young director, and he's got a lot of ideas. And the studio was upset. I want to say it had something to do with part of that car chase, and they were like the executives were going to show up to just read him the riot act, but Connery, being a producer, heard about the meeting, and because he was an executive producer, and this is on the Criterion DVD during the director's commentary. Bay was like, yeah, he was preparing to leave the set to go to a meeting with the executives when Connery came up to him, and he was wearing his golfing attire, right? He was getting ready to go golfing or something. He's like, hey, where are you going? And he told him, and he's like, do you mind if I come along? And so he walks into the meeting with the Disney executives, and in walks Michael Bay, and then Sean Connery walks in behind him. And he said, the meeting went a lot smoother because of him, because he came in and sat down, and things went a lot better. So, like, Connery kind of went
When
to
you have
bat for
somebody
him.
like him, I mean, you talk about his legend up
Yeah.
to that point, you know, and,
Oh, yeah.
and beyond. The man died in just a few years ago,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like he died in 2020, I'm pretty sure, from not COVID, but it was pneumonia or something
Yeah.
to that effect. But I mean that man is a legend, and God forbid anybody from going going against his will on a movie like that where he knows his stuff. And
Yep.
yeah, I'm glad he went to bat, because that I think this also, to your point about it being a young Michael Bay film, this set a very clear tone for what his movies were going to be like.
Yeah.
In the decades to come. Lots of explosions, gratuitous action, and there's just like how when you go see a Christopher Nolan movie, you know it's a freaking Christopher Nolan movie. When you see a what's the guy who did the new Dune movie, and he did
Villeneuve.
Villeneuve, like, you know it's a Villeneuve. Very clear. He puts his stamp on it, and it's not as elegant as those two, but it is absolutely, there's a place and an appreciation for that if you're an action movie fan, and it set a tone for a lot of directors to come. So that I think that he put his mark on the industry with that.
Yeah, like some directors can be, Ridley Scott, who can do a movie like Alien but also do a movie like Thelma and Louise 10 years later. And they're very different. Spielberg's the same way. Spielberg can be, you usually kind of can feel a Spielberg movie, but like the man made Jurassic Park and Schindler's List in the same year. Like, talk about two ends of the spectrum. Some directors can do that. Other directors are Michael Bay, or they're Tony Scott, Ridley's brother, who does, I mean, Tony Scott's Days of Thunder, Top Gun, like, you know a Tony Scott movie when you see it, because he's just got that style. Michael Bay has that style, and he's so good at it. I think when he is kind of not restrained, I feel like he's better when he's not restrained by doing something that's trying to appeal to mass audiences and having a little more, like, Transformers is a big audience and an IP, but then he turns around and does something like Pain and Gain, which is a smaller movie and it doesn't have the same fanfare. It's really a better movie. I haven't seen it yet, but I hear Ambulance, the one that he put out just a year or two ago, is supposed to be really good.
I heard that was good.
I
have not seen that one either. Maybe that's one to return for.
Yeah.
It's it's good to see directors, though, kind of not just pave a way for a lot of other people and to do things in similar veins and kind of set a precedent for what should be expected, but it's good to see that they're kind of comfortable finding their tone with those movies too. So I think that's a lot of fun.
Yeah. And like I say, it helps when you can cast so well. And they had, I mean, I mentioned Stuart Wilson earlier, who was General Kramer, but John Spencer's buddy in this, who's credited as, or not credited, but his character was known as Chief Justice, is Philip Baker Hall. And Philip Baker Hall is another actor you've seen in all sorts of stuff, great character actor. You got the chief of staff, the young guy, Hayden Sinclair, the one that gets torn down by Hummel, was David Marshall Grant, Even like Raymond Cruz, who at this point in his movie career, I only knew him as Top Knot because he always played like a soldier with a little top knot in his hair. Obviously, if you are a Breaking Bad fan, you know who Raymond Cruz is. You've seen him.
Oh yeah.
Xander Berkeley showing up in the beginning of it. That whole scene with the jar where they're diffusing that bomb at the beginning. Like every actor in that you've seen in movies, somewhere, and like all these actors, and they're all uncredited. None of them were in the end credits.
Right. That's a good point. That scene, by the way, you go into a scene in the first 20 minutes of a movie and you know that the guy's not going to die. But I don't know, man. I was pretty convinced that he might have died if they weren't really careful. I was genuinely, my heart was like pounding. That's another good example of ways that they learn to like build suspense and make it very convincing all at the same time. Because I just saw what happened to that dude with the boils all over his face.
Right.
I don't want that to happen to my hero character here. So that was a funny experience.
Yeah, and even if it doesn't happen to Cage, his trainee might not make it. You don't know. Like everything's fogging up, and I loved him. Isherwood, he was hilarious. You want me to stick this into my heart?
Yeah,
he's holding up that harpoon of a atropine needle.
I was like, oh god, this is foreshadowing something. I think this has got to be foreshadowing. I don't want to see that. It's gonna be terrible.
Which, by the way, when they do that at the end, the joke is like when Cage stabs himself with the atropine needle, he's too low. Because if you look at where it hit him, it's like it doesn't look like it's in his heart.
I mean, it was down in his ribs.
Yeah,
so
it was pretty bad. Also, unknown at the time, but a very young Jim Caviezel was in this movie. Although you never see, you only see his eyes. He's one of the two jet fighter pilots that drops the bombs at the end. If you ever go back, pay real close attention to one of the pilots in the jet when he flips up his visor. You can, if you look, you can see it's his eyes, but you wouldn't know it if you weren't told ahead of time.
Interesting.
Although interestingly, he's not one of the two pilots that they show. There's that one cutaway scene where it goes to like the hangar, and the one general starts telling him about like, this will be your mission if we have to do it. You're on ground alert right now. And then they just have a shot of two pilots sitting there with the most square jaw lines of anyone I've ever seen. And
I know exactly.
To the point where I grabbed a screen cap of it and I put it on Twitter because I was like, this movie is incredibly memorable, but this image is going to stick with me for a while now. Because for whatever...
Cut some glass with those jaws.
I mean, those were chins that would make Bruce Campbell jealous. Like, it was just crazy. But there's so much about this movie that I really like. The music, too. This is Hans Zimmer, and this is music that...
Yes.
You probably could be humming along to all this music and having never seen this movie because it either got reused somewhere or... like it influenced other music, or Hans Zimmer did similar things down the line, because like this music just lives rent free in my head. I hear it all the time.
It's another one of those you hear it and I looked it up at the beginning, like before I started watching. I was like, oh, it's a Hans Zimmer score. Cool. Another one of those very not obvious in a bad way, but you're like, yeah, that's Hans Zimmer. Like how something's John Williams or whatever. It was him, and I loved that contribution to the story.
Yeah. Now here's a question for you. It's not a short movie. It's 2 hours and 16 minutes long. Did it feel long to you?
No. It didn't feel long. I remember it ending last night and being like, oh my god, it's 10:30. Like I didn't realize. Like I should probably be going to bed here. It was, but not in a bad way. It was time well spent, and it also kind of flew by.
Yeah, it's paced really well, and that I think for as much, and they throw a lot of story at you because we get time with Stanley at home and at his job, and we meet the general and his men, and there's all this setup. Like they don't get to the island till an hour into the movie. where the SEAL team actually gets there. But because like everything's just so well paced and put together, and the dialogue is really snappy, that it never drags. There's never that point where you're like, well, they could cut this scene.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I didn't have it.
Yeah, I never feel that way. Like, there might be people that say like, oh, you could cut the scene where he's in the jar at the beginning, but I don't think so, because you need to know how good he is under pressure. Because for him to not be a field agent, it's like he basically has to call back to that, like, no, I'm good at a thing here, and I can translate that. And because you see him grow his confidence as they're on the island more and more. Like on the
you have to make that full circle. Like you have to have appreciation, just like the syringe at the beginning.
Yep.
Building the anticipation of the girlfriend and all that stuff. You have to put some stakes in. But they did it in a really meaningful way. And it really wasn't until, I mean, gosh, probably 45 minutes into the movie that you don't even see like Sean Connery until he shows up.
Yeah, he's
right?
something like 20, 25 or 30 minutes or something.
Is it that? It felt like there was a lot of story beforehand, because I was like, wow, I feel like I honestly was anticipating. I was like, okay, I know Sean Connery's in this movie. Is he already on the island? Because I feel like they should be talking about Sean Connery right now. Yeah. Like, is he in one of those, like, are they going to zoom in a cell and in a dark corner?
He's already
James
there.
Freaking he's already there plotting his revenge. Something like that.
Yeah, we spent a good amount of time with Hummel, and then there's the whole where they steal the rockets, and then we meet Stanley, and we meet his girlfriend, Vanessa Marcel. This was her first film, and it was funny because I'm watching it this time, and I'm thinking, oh, are we doing the classic Hollywood thing of, like, she's way younger than him, and because, like, she just looks like a baby in this. And you mentioned how young Nick Cage looks in it, but I'm still sitting here thinking, like, yeah, but he's probably like late 30s and she's like early to mid 20s. No, they're only 4 years difference. So I kind of appreciate that from the movie. But like we get time with them, so it makes you care about the character of Stanley, because he actually has a home life that isn't super simple either. Like, he's going to be a dad, but he wasn't prepared for that. Those are some great scenes too, and some great Cageisms.
Yeah, his whole realization of like, and he had that whole speech about like, God forbid anybody bring a kid into this world. Hey, I'm pregnant. Oh, okay.
I almost used that as the opening for the show tonight. Was that exchange? I did capture most of that, and it was hilarious because it's just like I'm pregnant. I'm sorry. Like, wait, hold on. Say that in my good ear, please.
Yeah, right.
There was so many moments like that where she comes home and he's sitting there like with the guitar, and I'm not sure if he's supposed to be naked with the guitar or just like sitting in his underwear, but like, yeah, I took a half a day off, have a little wine, almost died. No big deal.
Yeah. I like to imagine he was probably naked on that chair, imagining that the chaos that is Nick Cage,
probably
on that chair.
Probably. It's just what he does.
Oh, speaking of chaos, is Nick Cage, just in that last scene, one of the things that I loved in that last scene was because Raising Arizona is like one of my favorite Nick Cage movies of all time.
Mm-hmm.
And that felt very Raising Arizona, where they go and steal the photo, like the photo negatives.
Oh yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? At the very, very,
they find the microfilm.
Yeah, he's like, the way he's dressed and scattered, and like you hear yelling, and he's running, and it's in the desert, and he's like sliding over the car, and I'm like, oh man, this feels like Raising Arizona, and it felt full circle for me.
And it was cool to see him and William Forsythe together, because I think that was the first time they had worked together since Raising Arizona. Because the guy with the mustache, the West Coast director, he was in Raising Arizona. If you remember, he was with John Goodman.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, I didn't put two and two together there. Yeah, that's a good point.
It's one of those I know, I always remember he's in Raising Arizona, but this movie has such an imprint on me that's what I think of. Like if I'm talking with friends of mine and the name William Forsythe comes up as an actor somewhere, like because they've seen him in something, all I picture is him in a black suit with that mustache that he had in this movie.
Right.
Because like it's just
funny.
it's iconic. It's such a cop mustache.
Yeah, and he's such a he fills that role very well. He was very good.
He is, and he's one of those actors I feel like, and I've mentioned this a lot recently, but there are certain actors that when you see them in a movie, you're almost waiting for them to turn heel and go bad.
Yeah.
And like Forsythe is one of those. It's that gravelly voice, and he can
Genuinely
give you that look.
Be a bad.
Yeah. Like you're
Yeah.
just waiting for it to happen.
Yeah. What was the thing that he said? Oh, well, actually, it was your intro sound. That whole thing of like, oh, you've never been in. Have you been in
the
combat before? And
Yeah.
I remember the whole bathroom scene where Goodspeed's throwing up and totally like loops in his stomach and everything. And he's telling him like, get it together. I'm gonna have a kid. Get your head out of your head. Like, you know,
Yep.
it was.
Oh yeah.
It was
I caught some audio, and some of it includes that, because this movie is quoted. Like I quote this movie in a lot of ways. That, and it's always like the deep cut quotes. It's like I drive a Volvo, a beige one. Like you can't get any more boring than a beige Volvo. Which is why when I play like Forza Horizon, I will inevitably get the Volvo wagon and paint it beige, because I have to. But even stuff like my stomach's doing hula hoops around my ass.
Yes, I love that. Whenever I get sick,
whenever I get sick, and those are things Cage made up on the spot. You know it. Like no writer is going to write those words in that order. It's just something that he thought of.
Very.
And the stuff in the cells is even better. And I'll save that for when I play those, because it's just too good. But when Connery's making his little rope out of the mattress to open up the doors, I just love.
Yeah.
That's as close as we get.
Oh,
to
yeah.
Yeah,
that's pretty cool, by the way.
Yeah,
it's so good.
That's like as close as we get to the full Cage. He never goes a full Cage freak out, but he has a couple of moments like that. But this is a character that didn't need it.
No, he did something, and I actually wrote it in my notes. But I don't think I actually said the exact moment. But my notes said, let me see. It was actually when he was sitting on the couch playing naked.
Oh, yeah.
And he did this thing where he hits a guitar string, he plucks it, and I was like, that's very Nick Cage. Like
Yeah.
that, the way, because he winced it with his face and bent the string in a really terrible way.
Yep.
Just out of the blue as he's retelling his story. Like, that's very Nick Cage.
Yeah. Oh, it was so good. This for me is like a top 3 Nicolas Cage movie. And I love Cage movies. There's so many of them that I can watch over and over again. But this is one of those that when people say, do you have a favorite Nick Cage movie? The Rock is one of the first 3 titles that I give.
I agree. It's a high for me.
Yeah, it's got everything I want in a fun, like just dumb action movie that's made better by all these performances in it, because you care about Ed Harris and his character, even though he's very one note in terms of the writing. The performance gives him so much nuance. Like that whole scene in the shower room when they come in, when the Marines or the Navy SEALs come into the shower room, and then the Marines have the elevated position on them. That exchange between Ed Harris and Michael Biehn is so good, and it wouldn't be as memorable. Yeah, it would not be as memorable if it was lesser actors doing that.
Yeah, I would agree.
Like Ed Harris has this ability to yell too. That's very Gene Hackman like. Like that's another thing. Certain actors, Hackman can yell like no one else. Harris can do that, and it's weird because he's not like a big imposing guy, especially when you have him standing next to 6'4" David Morse and 6'5" Tony Todd. Like Ed Harris looks like he's the little brother, but he has a big presence to him. That
that man has not, well, I don't want to say he's not aged, because like, I mean, you could tell he's aged, but having just watched like a lot of Westworld and seeing him in that, and then watching him here, it's like the man has aged very gracefully into his elder years.
Oh yeah.
still holds that very imposing look, that, like what you were saying, that piercing eyes, the way he's able to kind of command a room and command, literally command people. He's still got it. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, it's the steely eyes, those blue eyes can do that. Paul Newman had that, right? Neil McDonough has that with those piercing eyes that he has. Like, it's just certain actors have that too. Plus, I love that he's the general. He's the top dog. Everybody's supposed to look up to him. But when the captain calls him on the bluff at the end, there's that time where he tells him to stand down, and then he says stand down again, but that second time he says it, his voice cracks.
Yeah.
And I liked that because that was something, it's a subtle thing to do, like, in terms of, we're going to put this in here, but it kind of makes the character just that more fleshed out because he is cracking a little bit under that pressure.
I have so we have a pool table just here in our basement, and I have a picture of the Hustler. I've got Jackie Gleason and Paul Newman doing their, like, they're at the pool table, and a signed check from Paul Newman in the case of the picture, and it's a check written by him for like $62 to somebody, and but it's a signed Paul Newman check. That's kind of cool.
Yeah,
it's a movie memorabilia sitting back over there.
That's the kind of movie memorabilia I would love to have hanging somewhere. Like, that's such a cool thing.
I'll send you a picture.
Yes,
whenever we're at some point.
So there's some,
I remember,
there's some really good clips in this movie that I got to play a few of.
Yes,
we can't. I mean, we mentioned Isherwood, who has that great line when Stanley calls him later. It's like, yeah, I'm getting out of this government shithole. I'm going to go design roach motels for Orkin.
Yeah. That's so good. Like, where did that come from? I heard that and I was like, what? It was just kind of one of those that took me back.
But it was this when they're in, because he's an idiot for picking up that doll in a box that they're supposed to be doing stuff. He picked up the doll and starts playing with him. Like, right. It just angers you, right? Because you're like, this guy's going to kill them. He's going to kill all of them because he was a dumb. But then he's got the atropine needle and he just says,
Look, how big's this shit? You want me to stick this into my heart? Are you f***ing nuts?
And the tension there, like that Hans Zimmer music is just pounding. Yeah. And
telling you, I was genuinely scared during that part.
And again, Michael Bay can take something like a bunch of guys in a room who are barely moving and make it dynamic because he's spinning the camera around. He's got coverage on everybody. Let's see. Oh, this is the White House Chief of Staff, and he's reading off General Hummel's record, his military service record. And I just love this whole exchange.
3 tours in Vietnam, Panama, Grenada, Desert Storm, 3 Purple Hearts, 2 Silver Stars, and the Congressional Medal of Jesus. This man is a hero.
Well, I think legend might be a better description, Mr. Sinclair.
And I had to slide in Stuart Wilson at the end there because, like, I just love that. No, legend is better. Just
I feel like they could have been like, and a partridge in a pear tree.
So for that, and then when he gets to actually talk to this guy, and Hummel is just like, you aren't old enough to talk. Shut up and let the adults talk.
Yeah. That was good.
Michael Biehn being Michael Biehn, who he just makes a small part like this so much better. When they're looking over the blueprints of the tunnels, and he's trying to explain, they're like, well, what are the tunnels like? And he just says,
under there is a maze of shit.
Yeah.
Such a good delivery. I love that.
I love that whole part where, because he was like, I don't know, it's all up here. Like, you got to send me in. I gotta see it. What do you mean I'm not going to be able to see it? And that whole exchange was very good.
That was very good. And then when they get ready to go, and he's giving them their last mission briefing, and he looks to Lieutenant Shepard, and he just tells him,
all right, listen up. Mr. Mason will run point for us. Lieutenant Shepard will be attached to his hip.
You breathe, he breathes with you. You piss, he helps. Understood?
Like, that's such a movie line, and I love it.
Yeah,
'Cause it's just so cheesy, but it's great. Speaking of that, Philip Baker Hall talking about John Mason being, in his 60s.
30 years ago, he was a highly trained SAS operative. He is my age now, for Christ's sake. I have to get up 3 times a night to take a piss.
It's such a highlight.
Yeah, no,
So
that's doing it for me. Okay, are you familiar with the Michael Bay shot? If I say that, do you know what I'm talking about?
You're talking about where it goes, and then another, and then the guy gets impaled by the spear.
Well, there's that one, but specifically, it's the low angle circular shot where somebody stands up in the middle of it. He does it in Bad Boys, in Bad Boys 2, in this.
Yeah.
And like, it's
when did he do it in?
So it's right after Cage crashes the Ferrari, and the streetcar's coming at him.
Oh yes.
And I love that because he pulls out the gun and shoots the airbag so he can get out of the car.
Yes.
And he gets out of the car, and then there's that low angled shot, and it's spinning around him, and Nicolas Cage stands up into the frame, and he kind of looks off, and then the kid rolls up on the motorcycle, and
Hey man, you just f***ed up your Ferrari.
It's not mine.
It's not mine.
Yeah, and you hear the trolley dude in the background screaming.
That's what makes that work so much better. Is it's that dramatic moment, and then there's just the dude screaming in the background about how the guy's not safe anywhere.
It's so good.
Some Sean Connery.
The sausage in this I thought. Yeah. I swear to God, I thought that was sausage. I had no idea. I don't understand it. I don't understand how I thought that.
I don't either. To be honest, you talked about the chemistry of Connery and Nick Cage, and like this little exchange here encapsulates it. It's right after they've taken out the 2 guys in the morgue. They drop the air conditioner on the one dude's head. And Stanley's working on the rocket, right? And then this happens.
You've been around a lot of corpses. Is that normal?
Yeah. Well, the feet thing?
Yeah, the feet thing.
Yeah, that happens.
I'm having kind of a hard time concentrating. Can you do something about it?
Well, like what? Kill him again?
Gosh, it's so good. And by the way, another great example of the practical effect and the shots leading up to it crushing the dude.
Yeah,
that whole thing where even leading up, you see it hanging there, and you're following Sean Connery's, Mason's eyes as he's looking at it. You're like, are you thinking what I'm thinking? Yeah, let's do that. Let's crush him with it. And that was very fun.
And again, that's where I mentioned, like, Michael Bay is so good at directing action and getting you to look at things, like, because Mason shoots low, takes the guy's feet out, so he falls over.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get that up shot where you're looking down at him, and the first thing you see is just the guy laying there. And then your eye is suddenly drawn to the foreground of that shot, and it's the big air conditioner sitting there. And you see Mason look over, and you've just seen it from that angle. So now when he looks over and is looking up, you immediately know what he's thinking. And you're like, oh, I know how this is going to play out, and it's going to be brutal. And it was.
The camera work is great because he does these setup shots where before any of the action happens, there's maybe 3 seconds of this back and forth, and like camera angle down, camera angle up, catch his eyes, see him look up, and then you just looked up, and then it's like bring it back, and then it unfolds. And it's a great way of bringing, not forcing the viewer to think one way or another, but it's like almost like you're holding their hand, like they're like following you as he's shooting the shot.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really cool way to kind of bring the viewer along.
Yeah.
In those moments where things are happening so quick in an action scene. I thought it's very cool.
Yeah. For a movie that had an average shot length of like 2.6 seconds. So you think about that in a 2 hour and 16-minute movie, how many cuts and shots there are. And for him to be able to like guide you through these action sequences, and you know where everyone is. Like you could take and draw a map of an overhead view and map out where everybody is, and it all makes sense. Nobody's ever overlapping or like appearing in a spot that makes no sense to them. So I just love that, and I appreciate that in an action director, because some directors get lost. I've watched movies where I'm just like, I don't know what's happening anymore. There's just movement and people shooting. I love, right before this clip that I'm going to play, is they've just entered Alcatraz, and it's the shot, and it's Sean Connery's smile, because you can tell he's just having a good time, and Cage says, well, you seem to be enjoying yourself. And his response,
well, it's certainly more enjoyable than my average day. Reading philosophy, avoiding gang rape in the washrooms. Though it's less of a problem these days. Maybe I'm losing my sex appeal.
No, Mr. Bond, not you.
By the way, I was going to say at the beginning of the show we should have done a drinking game for take a shot every time somebody does a bad Sean Connery accent. We've done really well not overdoing that, and also had I mentioned that at the beginning of the show, we might kill people. So,
yeah. Well, there you go. You get take 2 shots right there.
You go.
I did too.
I also just loved this line.
Oh, I have a unique knowledge of this prison facility. I was formerly a guest here.
I don't know what it is. It's just the way he says it. You can hear the smirk in his voice.
He had the same smirk. I remember him rolling through the fire, to let them into that door. Which he memorized the whole thing. At what point when he was trying to leave was he trying to roll through that? Because he opened the door from the side that he was coming out of.
So that was the thing people have said, and the logic way you can hand wave that away is like that door was probably guarded, or that was inaccessible to him, so he didn't have a choice. But also, Michael Bay even said like, yeah, all the boilers were active and stuff on Alcatraz, yet it hasn't been active for like 30-something years. He goes, but it does look pretty cool, doesn't it? So he just sort of like,
And when those questions come up, you have to be like, hey, is it fun? Yeah, cool.
Rule of cool, right?
Totally. But I watched it. I remember thinking like, am I missing something? And the more I thought about it, I'm just like, all right, but whatever. That was a cool scene. It stressed me out a lot though, from a claustrophobia perspective. Not a fun thing.
No. No, and suspension of disbelief is a big thing in movies, and like I can suspend disbelief a lot in movies. I do reach a breaking point. Like Stephen Sommers is a director. He did The Mummy and The Mummy Returns, with Brendan Fraser, who is able to do some of those things. There was a great commentary track on the first Mummy movie where it's the shootout on the boat, and he's like, you should always have 2 guns in the shootout. Like if you could hold 3, it would be better, right? But you can't. So 2 is kind of the max that you can do. And he would talk about stuff like this, and like there's a scene in The Mummy Returns where Fraser is running, and the sun is coming up, and he's got to get to like a pyramid before the sun hits it. And in his commentary track, he was talking about, look, I understand that like logically the speed of light is faster than Brendan Fraser, and he can't run faster than that. But if I need Brendan Fraser to outrun the sun, then Brendan Fraser can outrun the sun. Okay, it's Stephen Sommers physics. It's my movie. It's how it goes. And like I can appreciate that. Yeah. Now, he did lose me in his G.I. Joe movie when he made a giant block of ice explode into smaller pieces and then sink. And I was like, we've taken it a step too far, Stephen. I can't get behind that one. But that's where, going under the boilers in this, I'm just like, nah, it's fine. Who cares? So the boilers were on. No big deal. It looks awesome. It's such a cool look.
Yeah. I thought it was so fun. Oh yeah.
Let's see. So I mentioned how like early Sean Connery was he was a little snarky, and I love when they say they need his help on something. This is when Paxton, William Forsythe's character, is interrogating him the first time. Mm-hmm. And he comes back with,
I've been in jail longer than Nelson Mandela, so maybe you want me to run for president.
That was great.
That one was good. And then, okay, so the one thing I think that has probably, it's still funny, but it's aged the worst in the movie is the barber, the stylist, that comes up to cut his hair. That was just like nobody knew how to write queer characters in the 90s, so they ended up being jokes, and it's
being jokes. Yeah,
that actor I have seen in other things, and he is actually a pretty good actor, and he was just doing what they asked him to do here.
Yeah. Is he? He's a. Yeah, it was like I've seen him in other things. Like, I didn't actually take time to look. Has he been in stuff recently? But like, I've recognized his face.
I can't think of anything recently. He was in a sitcom for a long time called like Boston Common, I think.
Anthony Clark.
But
that's the guy. Boston Common, Yes Dear, Soul Man.
Yeah, Yes Dear.
He's on Ellen.
The other one. But he the scene with him is okay, but what I love is when Womack is going over all his gear and he's like telling him, you know, yeah, you can have the trimmer, that's fine, but no scissors. With scissors, this man could kill you. And it's just Sean Connery again.
I can't cut anyone's balls off with a trimmer now, can I?
It's such... I want to know how many takes of that they did. How many times did they get Sean Connery to say, cut somebody's balls off? That's what I want.
Balls off.
And then, of course,
take a shot.
He steals the Hummer, right? And he's driving it through San Francisco when the German guy who owns it calls the car phone, and he picks it up, and you just get
Hello?
Sie haben meinen Hammer gestohlen.
I'm only borrowing your Humvee.
Yeah. Crashes it right into those cars.
Yes.
That was where he hit the cars into the electric pole and it fell over, right?
Yep, exactly.
I was like, damn, that they did not like. Again, suspension of disbelief. The way he hit those cars, you see the front of the Humvee kind of cave in at that moment, and then it pans to another shot really quick, and then it pans back of him driving off towards the camera. The front of that Humvee is pristine, bro. It didn't hit nothing, and I was just like,
they did that with the Ferrari too. The Ferrari hits all those parking meters, and like the first parking meter he hits smashes the windshield of the Ferrari, and you see it like all spiderwebbed, and then they cut away and they come back and it's fine. So yeah, that definitely happened a couple of times.
Moving magic, as they say.
A little bit of Nick Cage. So again, he doesn't swear, right? So when he finally catches up with John at the Palace of Fine Arts, and they're walking away from his daughter, who played by Claire Forlani, again adds a lot to a very small, amount of screen time. But as they're walking away, and he's like, "Why don't we cut the chit chat?" I just love this.
What do you say we cut the chit chat? A-hole.
He's still he wants calling him an a-hole.
That's really. I'm glad that you played that because I wasn't sure if that was just an FX edit. By the way, when I was watching it, I was like, I couldn't tell if he dubbed chit chat with like the S word or something.
Oh yeah.
That the way that it was edited, I was questioning some of those things. So I'm glad that all right.
Yeah, no, that was exactly how it was in the movie. There was also I got a bunch of Cage, like his stuff again at the house with his girlfriend with Carla is his girlfriend's name. Like this.
I meant it at the time.
Stanley, at the time you said it 7.5 seconds ago.
Well, gosh, kind of a lot's happened since then.
Yeah, a lot has happened in those. To be fair.
Yep, I use this a lot.
I mean it, honey. The world is being FedExed to hell on a handcart.
Like when things are going wrong, it's just been FedEx to hell on a handcart. I'd never heard that phrase before, but
that's got to be like a Nick Cage.
Oh, it has to be.
Has to be. Like, because who says that? Nick Cage does.
Yeah, Nick Cage, and because of that, I do. When he's pulling the stuff out of the box at the beginning.
Stone Age cave girls in the raw. Kinky.
Or like this was definitely I feel like was a Nick Cage, ad lib.
Look, I just stole a kid's motorcycle. I'm not really feeling too good about it, okay? Whooper, got it?
Because it's just so rapid fire, and like he just has this way about delivering stuff like that.
Yep. Yeah.
Let's see.
And by the way, those boxy cell phones, man.
Oh yeah.
Gosh,
Ooh,
it
boy.
was the 90s. Wow. Car phone.
Gosh. Because that phone in the Humvee, in the Hummer, was attached to like a giant bag. Like,
it had to be.
Just an attaché case sized battery. Let's see. Shame on them. This was a good one.
Shame on them!
I just want that
Very
for my
Nick
soundboard.
Cage.
That is.
Yes. Add that to the soundboard.
This is when he's when the phone rings while he and Carla are in flagrante. Because again, this is his total Cage thing.
This isn't happening!
This isn't happening. he's like trying to hold his concentration, and it's just not working.
And her response of like, he was like, okay, I'll be 10 minutes. I'll be down in 10 minutes. Like, hell you will.
Yeah. And her response after that is like, I'm Catholic, I'm pregnant, and I'm unwed.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh boy, yeah. Nope, those are
a good line. That was such a good line.
So this one's a little long, but it's worth it. This is our I think our last one.
How, in the name of Zeus's butthole, did you get out of your cell? I only ask because in our current situation, well, it could prove to be useful information. Maybe!
That
was the same moment where he builds the blanket bit to
open the door, yeah.
Because it's so good. It's so good.
And so now forever I will have.
In the name of Zeus's butthole!
You could even just take the last little butthole little thing. And,
I probably will shorten it to that, to be honest.
Yeah, could be.
Because it's just so good. This movie is just it's just 90s cheese in the perfect way. And this when I got a hold of you and you said you hadn't seen The Rock, this was the perfect thing to end this year's Cage Fest on, because it is one of my favorites, and I get to show it to a great friend of mine. You get to see this for the first time. If you get a chance sometime, find the Criterion Collection like DVD of it. It's not on streaming services, and it's been a weird one where it like didn't show up for a long time. I ended up getting it from my library a while back.
Oh yeah. Okay.
And it might even be on the library streaming service Hoopla. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but if you've got a library card, there's a whole bunch of stuff. But it's just one of those movies that like it's like a comfort film for me. I can just go back to this anytime, and I never get tired of it. It's like this movie, Hot Fuzz, is one of those that I can just watch anytime, and I just enjoy it because they know what they are. Like this isn't a parody, but it's like it doesn't take itself too seriously, but it's made so earnestly. Like everybody that's being serious is going for it, and then there's those moments of levity sprinkled in there that just work, and they make it rewatchable too. So
for sure, I think that this is quintessential. Like you said, it's quintessential 90s action, quintessential Nick Cage at a young age, and also I don't want to say it's quintessential Nick Cage. Actually, I kind of take that back, because he doesn't go full on Nick Cage that you see in other movies and stuff, but he does enough of it for you to be like, yeah, this is a really good like Nick Cage movie. I think this is up there in my top 3 as well. But I think that on top of that, when you watch a movie like this and you see what Michael Bay did in the 90s, it gives you more appreciation. For me personally, at least, it gave me a lot more appreciation for the way that action movies were portrayed through the early 2000s and so on, and a lot of really good movies that came out, especially by him. kind of after that. It's solid,
And
solid choice. So thank you for bringing for bringing it to my attention, because otherwise I would have probably let it simmer for forever longer.
Yeah, it's one of those where you can see its influence on so many action movies. So I'm glad that you got to see this, and maybe now, if there's other kind of this era films that you haven't seen, stuff like, if you like this, you'll probably like something like No Escape. You'll love those kind of lower or kind of mid to upper budget but R-rated action movies that just go for it. They just make choices and dive in. And this is one of them, and it's just so good. So it's been great. It's been too long since you were on. I think we figured it was like 3 years ago that you were last on.
Gosh,
which was just crazy. So
yeah, I mean there are plenty of other movies I haven't seen, so we can do it again.
Yeah, well, it was great having you on as always. It's always fun. We don't get to talk enough anymore, so we did play some Baldur's Gate 3 recently together, which was fun.
Did do some more of that. That's a good game there, right there.
Are you getting back into streaming at all? Are you thinking about doing that?
I'm kind of giving it some thought. I am planning on doing something. Every year I try to do stuff for Extra Life. It's a great organization that helps raise money for kids, sick kids, and every year around Halloween and into the holiday season, I try to raise money. Every year I've raised at least $2,000, which is pretty cool. And I was thinking, it might be pretty cool to try to get back into doing something like that, especially with scary game season coming back.
Yeah.
And that's a big I'm a big fan of scary games. So very likely that something's going to happen. I don't want to promise anything yet. I got to kind of make sure schedules and kids' schedules and everything aligns, because the world is crazy these days. But it has been top of mind for me. So we shall see. Stay tuned.
Well, if you do, let me know, and I will be sure to promote it here and let people know when they can watch it, where they can see it, and where they can donate to, because Extra Life is a great organization, and I've had a lot of fun doing those games with you in the past and doing stuff for them in the past as well. So definitely. But thank you so much for being here. This was just great. It had been far too long.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so I do this show weekly, twitch.tv/TV's Travis on Sunday nights. You can watch the live stream. If you can't make the live stream, it is available as a podcast on Wednesdays, wherever you get your podcasts. Also on YouTube as a podcast. You can go to youtube.com/@TV's Travis and catch it there. As always, subscribe and follows and stuff on there is great. I am on all the social networks as TV's Travis, and literally like all of them. I think I opened up a web browser and like did tabs and I had 5 or 6 different. I'm like, geez, I have way too many at this point. But you got to get your name. You got to get your name down on all of those. So, or you can just go to tvstravis.com. That has links to merchandise. It has links to the Patreon for this show, where you can support for as little as $1 an episode. Get things like the monthly movie catch-up nights, where I go back through with patrons. We watch movies from the Wait You Haven't Seen back catalog and catch people up on them. We got one coming up this week. We're doing, because it's August, Nick Cage, Vampire's Kiss. So patrons are going to get to watch that. This coming up Thursday, August 31st is when that is going to be. So I do those once a month. So it's a lot of fun. Alex, where can people find you if you post anything online?
Yeah, I'm everywhere at Alex Albisu. Last name is spelled Albisu. And I have a show called The Dad Chronicle. All those episodes are still up. And it's kind of my way of giving back to the world. Travis was on it. It's a way of giving back to the world of parenting. We talk to dads from around the world about their experiences as a parent, and to share those perspectives, as well as parenting experts and doctors and other folks who have a lot of good information to help empower parents to do their best work. So thedadchronicle.com is another place that you can go. Everything that I do is really found over at incastmedianetwork.com. That's my website, my company. So feel free to follow that. And stay tuned for anything coming up on the socials at Alex Albisu.
Excellent. Well, once again, thank you. And just, for everybody, get out or stay in, enjoy your movies. And just remember that this has been Wait You Haven't Seen.
Hey, the last time I swam this channel, I was your age, so I'm fucked either way.